And as you can hear, I am starting to record this meeting. So welcome everyone to this Virtual Innovation Center workshop focusing on de-risking your fundraising. I'm Aline, for those who don't know me, working for Nucleus and overseeing these topics within the Virtual Innovation Center that are mostly focusing on supporting companies on their growing journey. So whether they are looking at becoming more operational, becoming more active deal maker, and importantly, as it's a big part of the whole life science journey growth, raising a further round of money. So I'm sure you're all familiar with what it takes to going for fundraising, looking for investors, scouting for them, and building a pitch and a narrative around that. But we thought that would be interesting to go a bit more into depth into this topic and work on this preparedness and readiness, and ultimately to do risk this fundraising exercise that is crucial for any company growth. So I'm delighted to be joined today by experts in the space who will spend the next hour with you, sharing their knowledge of how to de-risk fundraising, how to approach fundraising in the most efficient way, both from the company perspective and investor understanding. And we'll touch base on some elements of asset valuation that we felt would be really important for life science companies. So I'm going to pass in a second to them, Oyster Venture Partners, and starting with David Dayton, who's the executive chairman. But just a quick housekeeping mention, obviously we want you to be able to share or to ask any questions. So if you have any, please drop them in the chat box so then we can pick up on them and discuss a bit more into detail. And then obviously we'll make this recording available to you and follow up with the Oyster Venture Partners speakers. So David, over to you.
Fantastic. Aileen, thank you very much indeed for that great introduction, and to Oyster. So hello everyone. It's a great pleasure for us to join you today for the next hour. We have a proposition and dynamics within the fundraising side of the evolution from concept through to commerce, in effect, that we would like to discuss with you and to show you exactly what it is that is required for investment readiness. But in addition, we very much want your participation, so we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So broadly speaking, within the first 40 minutes, we'll take you through some of the aspects of capital raising for biotechnology companies and for digital health companies. But then we will leave a question open, and we also have a poll that we would be very interested if you would like to participate in completing, because it'll give us all a sense for where people are on the investment readiness journey. So first of all, I'm delighted to introduce my colleagues. First, Dr. Laurent Pacheco and also Carl Weir. Both Laurent and Carl are both Oyster Venture Partners, both based in London. So we cover effectively the whole of the UK, Europe, and have operations and partners operating in the US as well. But primarily, the three of us are based in London and very much an integral part. We would like to think of the Cambridge ecosystem as Oyster is a partner of One Nucleus. So we're obviously delighted to support this Virtual Innovation Center workshop today. Carl, perhaps you might like to just give 1 minute on your background and your role within Oyster, and then followed by Laurent, please.
Thank you, David. As you can see, my name is Carl Weir. I'm venture partner for digital health and data within Oyster Venture Partners. I have a background in finance, health tech, deep tech, as well as data, AI. I'm sure I can rattle off as many acronyms as I like, but my background is also from a product perspective, as well as C-level, as well as number crunching through all of these. I'm also responsible for the data valuation business within Oyster.
Carl?
Thanks, Carl. Hi, everybody. I'm Laurent Pacheco. Very nice interacting with you today. I'm also a venture partner with a focus on biopharma. In terms of background, I was trained a medical doctor in France and later on a health economist with a PhD. And I've been on the B2B side as a consultant throughout my career with PwC to start, and later on I joined Syneos Health, where I led the international commercial activities. Very nice meeting you.
Very nice meeting you too. Next slide, Laurent, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take you through Go back one, Carl, Laurent, please. Thank you very much. So what we will do, I think, initially is just take you through the innovator to investor conundrum, the 0.7%, which I will very happily explain to you, and what we mean by the 4 T's. Laurent will then take us through the successful investment pitch components. The issue, very simply, is we receive almost 1 new inbound deal opportunity per day, sometimes more, sometimes a bit less, but on average. And all of them are something like 70% about science and technology. There's a nice slide on the management team. There is a market slide and some pathway to market and how much investment is required. But there are many, many missing components. And this is the primary reason why so many investors are finding it difficult to engage with investors. And given that investors have such a huge deal flow of their own, it is quite no wonder that so many responses are not even received. We then have a poll, as I mentioned earlier. We'd be very interested in your contribution to that, just a sort of an honestly speaking between us in the family sort of view as to where you think you might be on the investment readiness scale. We have also the data valuation proposition we would like to introduce you to, and Carl will drive this segment. This very much is valuing an asset within your business that you are almost certainly not valuing at this particular point. And if you can add further value to your organization before you go into an investor discussion, then clearly the amount of equity that is given away will be reduced. And I think that Carl will have some very interesting propositions to make to you at that particular point. I briefly take you through how we evaluate technologies and sciences that are sent to us, and also our strategic advisory board process, which effectively enables us to sift and sort the propositions that we believe actually are investable. And for those that aren't, there are recommendations made that we will then hand back to the prospect and ask them to come back when those components are completed. So that then takes us to a Q&A after about 40 minutes. And obviously, we would love to hear your questions, challenging and brutal as you wish to make them. But we'd be very happy to field as many as we can. And of course, we'd be very happy to engage with you after the webinar at any stage, should you want further advice and help. So that's where we are. Next slide, please, Laurent. Thank you. So Oyster Venture Partners. So I co-founded this with Rupert Lewis, who's based in Manchester. We have a team also based in Belgium, and we cover effectively the whole of the healthcare space. So biotechnology, biopharma, all the way through to medical technologies and devices, and through to digital health, and of course, as Carl mentioned, data. But where we overlap and how we're positioned with the Virtual Innovation Center is that for companies like your good selves coming through the various stages of finance and funding for your respective businesses, really when it comes to the Series A level of investment, circa 4 or 5 million upwards to anything to 50, it is where we become involved and would be delighted to work with you and support you in raising the capital, in accelerating the raising of capital for your businesses, so that the benefits of new technologies can, of course, be felt by the healthcare sector sooner, perhaps, than might otherwise be the case. We have a very large international partner network, so we supplement what the Virtual Innovation Center can do. We have partners active all the way from Australia right across the Middle East, Europe, and of course to the US and Canada. So both on the investment capital raising side and also on introducing to overseas markets, we would clearly be delighted to help you, and that's how we also dovetail with the Virtual Innovation Center. Next slide, please. So primarily our role is to ensure that the proposition that you have constructed is brought up to investor-ready standard. Now, I know that this is a term which is widely used, but it means different things to different people, indeed, as much as the terminology within the biotech and biopharma sectors also mean. So what we effectively do is we raise all of our clients' propositions to full investor-ready standard before we approach the markets. We're great believers in there is no second chance to make a good first impression, or high impact at least. So the position simply is that we take propositions in conjunction with you. We lead first and then introduce you to investors for whom we find are appropriate for your particular science or technology, and then of course support you through to the term sheet stage, and then on to and through closure. So we very much act as a hand-holding support all the way from beginning to end. We cover, as I said, life sciences, the whole biopharma space, also diagnostics, medical technology and devices, digital health and platforms. So we have three venture partners. A third venture partner is based in Belgium. That's Dr. Chris Maltmans, who very much is focused on the drug discovery space and all related sciences and technologies to that. And then clearly from a data valuation point of view, we would encourage you obviously to have a separate conversation with Carl, because that is something that can be optionally added as a supplement to your capital raising activities. So our primary markets are clearly the UK, the European Union and the US. In terms of capital raising, we have deep access to a huge number of investors. We have many tools. Innovate UK invested in Oyster last year quite substantially, and that has enabled us to build a platform which gets us into and closer to many more investors, and we can sift and sort with a high degree of precision the type of investors who are actively looking for propositions of your respective profiles at this particular point. So if you'd like to go on to the next slide, Laurent, please. So we're a team effectively of 8 people, but we are also backed by a strategic advisory board of 24 as it currently stands. These are tier 1, very often PhD level industry experts who have had 30-40 years in the industry, and we have mapped their skills onto a matrix, which means that every time we get a proposition into Oyster, we effectively map that onto an individual who has had long experience in your very sector. And as part of the evaluation and selection process and engagement process that we operate, we have our own independent capability to assess the investability of your proposition, given what else is going on in the market and what else actually might be being developed as well. So in effect, we have a virtual team of 24 sitting behind us as a core team of 8 people. Rupert Lewis, listed there, is my partner, co-owner of the business. And of course, across the centre line, you have the 3 main venture partners, Laurent, Carl, and Chris, who I've mentioned. Benny Daniels works as part of the engagement team, and anyone who would be approaching Oyster would be engaging with Benny, who has got a very strong and broad capability to assess initially the propositions from a scientific and also from an investability point of view as well. So he's part of the engagement team, and of course we have an analyst team that supports that. So next slide, please. So Laurent, you might like to take everyone through our sectors in a bit more detail. We can't hear you, Laurent.
Yes, thank you, David. So this information you can find from the UK Office of Life Sciences. It's quite a good description of the various life sciences sector. We do cover all of them, so I won't go through the very detail of it. It is very UK centered, but as David mentioned, we are very happy to help you be credible on many more markets. So life science, yes, which is of course divided into biopharma, and I very much focus on this startup segment. We service medtech and devices as well, and there is more detail if you want to understand your segment business market, or potentially even competitive markets. And Carl, it's for you to comment on the right green chart if you wish.
No, thank you. With a focus on digital and data, I'm sure everyone's seeing the rise of precision medicine, precision therapies, the RWD and RWE data. I know, again, a lot of acronyms, but this is becoming a growth sector in itself. And what we wanted to be able to do and have proven to do is to be able to help you in both the digital health projects that you've got, as well as, of course, utilizing that data in the most appropriate fashion with the most appropriate parties based on GDPR, DPA best practices.
Okay, so let's go back to the investor conundrum as far as innovators are concerned. So what we'll do is take you through one of the surveys that was done in the US. So the Corporate Finance Institute ran a survey. There's the link at the bottom of the slide, which you might like to look up. There's quite a good information in background to that. But this was propositions that were sent directly by innovators with their IP and with their forming companies that had perhaps had 1 or 2 million invested at this particular point, but they sent their propositions to investors for investment, as indeed everyone does. The output was quite interesting because what resulted was that only 200 of those propositions sent produced any sort of meaningful response by the investors. And even for those 200, by the time investment was in fact made, 20 people ended up being funded. And that, of course, is 0.7%, which is the equivalent of 1 in 142 submissions that were made by innovators direct to investors. We did a survey last year, and one of the, which I'll come to in a moment in a bit more detail, but investors consistently say that the place from which they prefer to receive deal flow, their own deal flow, inbound deal flow, is in fact from other investors. So investors who they know, who believe that this particular investor would be an ideal syndicate partner for them. And the least preferred is direct random deal flow coming in effectively to their inbox on the back of a website submission. And this is causing a lot of issues because clearly innovators are not flush with funds nor time for that matter. And as a consequence, it is an incredible exercise to entice investors to become involved in your project. We see this very much in the context of 4 T's. And what investors are looking for is effectively a combination of great technology, of course, novel, disruptive, with strongly secured IP, with good freedom to operate, with a very strong healthcare economic dynamic, and so on. So that sort of, broadly speaking, ticks the great tech box. The great team is important. And Laurent, of course, will come on to this in a bit more detail, but of course is that there is evaluation or judgment being made by investors talking to each of the teams as to whether or not they can be trusted with 5 or 10 or 20 million in funding, that in fact the investor will put in 1x here, but they would expect 10x out some point later in the journey, and the competence and capability of the management team is something which is very important to them. One of the great measures, of course, of whether a team is effective is the degree of traction in the marketplace that the team has already achieved in terms of stimulating interest, either by major industrial partners, by wide, highly accredited key opinion leaders, and other partnerships that might have be involved in evaluating the technologies. So it's quite easy to see where management teams have been highly effective and could be highly effective, therefore, in making a return on the investment that is made. And of course, great thinking, and that of course means really pathway to the market, smart strategies about making sure that there are strong market adoption drivers being on display and evidenced in every proposition. In other words, if the proposition were ready tomorrow, the product, the technology, whatever, what are the key driving points that would actually suck it and pull it into the marketplace? How well has that research been done? So it's very important that every proposition really encompasses and tells the story of the 4 T's and why it is that in combination, this makes a great investment return proposition. What typically we find is that the majority of propositions are technology-based. The team, of course, self-presents, and that's fine. The traction is not always that evident. and the thinking sometimes is undecided, leaving very many questions open as to what would happen if the money were invested and what choices would subsequently be made. So this is really a key slide, I think, to take into account. And I'll just give one small anecdote. We work with a fund in London. It's a 300 million fund, just one of the many. But they only last week told me that they review 1,000 propositions per year, approximately. That's the rate of deal flow they get, which is 5 per working day. They invest in 5 per year. So you can see the scale and the nature of the problem. And that is why taking your proposition to market on a highly investor-ready basis is so essential. So Laurent, I think we'll take us through some of those pitch components that are necessary in our particular view. So over to you, Laurent.
Thanks, David. So indeed, we ran this survey last year. Investor came back and told us they would like to see more than 200 elements that composed of a successful investment pitch. And you see here how we've categorized these from 1 to 18. So this is very much the raw material, right? The information we got from this survey. The point for us is to make this useful to you. And we've embedded that in our approach to supporting startups in what we call our playbook. And I'm going to demonstrate a bit of that. The very point is to anticipate. I guess this is my key message here. Anticipate questions, try and answer as best as possible early on what investor could ask you, knowing that they have very much a late phase in mind. Yes, we are early, we are startups, but they really want to understand and think whether there is a good business opportunity much later on. So this is this anticipation exercise that we want to cover. So remember these 4 T's: team, tech, traction, and thinking. So let's start with the team here. And this is again part of our playbook and how we help you get ready on this dimension. You want to demonstrate that your team is capable and credible, as David said earlier. Of course, most often we startuppers or scientists or kind of career startuppers, some have already had this experience, which is great because it's the starting point. But what investors want to see is how capable you would be in driving the business further in its entirety. And science is just the beginning. So you may see, it's a tiny graph at the bottom right, a radar, which is a way to make visible where the team's capability lies. So the items here are science, legal, business, technical, clinical development, manufacturing, networking, and you can map individuals where their expertise lie. Sorry. And the point is to try and have the broadest mapping as possible. Of course, we can't cover everything. Of course, we are at an earlier stage, but at least we should ask the right question, understand what are the gaps we have in our own team competency, and look elsewhere how maybe we can find that competency with partners, with potentially advisors, professionals who work in other lines of business, linked to the development, to manufacturing that we will need at a later stage. What will distribution look like, and how we identified business partners already. Even if it's very, very early, investors would love to hear that you've explored. You may have had already one or a few discussions with professionals in these other fields, and you can demonstrate that you're able to embrace the 360 range of the business questions. On the technology, the second T side, well, I guess we're all pretty strong on that. Again, it's very science-based. We start with that. So what are your scientific arguments? Does this cover an unmet need? How you would position the product? Do you own an IP? How far are you in the development? Is there already a proof of principle or even a prototype? And have you validated these science foundations? That, I'm sure everybody's quite comfortable with the logic. The point I want to make here is how does this science link with a valuable, recognized use, oftentimes from a patient perspective. And so the point here, we can think of what happened to Sanofi recently. They've been very excited throughout the development with PCSK9, a new product to treat hypercholesterolemia, because it was novel. It was a novel way, very innovative scientific route to address the disease. But I think eventually payers, or those who would fund reimbursement, told us, even before launch, we knew, well, yes, but actually science fine as long as it does something that really makes a difference. And in this case, the mechanism of action was novel, but the efficacy wasn't better. And unsurprisingly, this hasn't been a great commercial success. And another story I can tell you is interacting with our clients. One developed a product to treat atopic dermatitis. This is a competitive marketplace. Competitors were treating the underlying cause of the disease, which is the disease causes flares on the skin. What our client developed is a treatment that actually treats the symptoms, but not the underlying scientific cause. How valuable is that? And interestingly, depending on the market, most often, even specialists, physicians and KOLs will say, well, if you're not treating the underlying cause in the physiopathology, you're not so much treating the disease, so it's not so valuable. But interestingly, in other markets, in Canada, for example, physicians said, well, but for this disease, if there is no symptom, there is actually no problem, because no symptom means no complaint, no need for patients to see their doctor. And because it's not a lethal or dangerous condition at all, it's actually a way to properly take care of patients. So my point is, being science and the value eventually it brings to patients, the link should be made very clearly. And we shouldn't only focus on science. Investors want to see what eventually value would be developed, because this is what will generate the revenue. Our third theme, traction, relates to the market dynamics. What strength, what dynamics would there be for you to grow your business? So of course it links with the competitive landscape, how you differentiate, how you own this differentiation. We mentioned earlier the IP, which means can you raise barriers for others not to copy you so easily, and how able are you to develop a value story based on this differentiation, these unique selling points, and target the right customer for them eventually to buy, right, to pay for it. And this opens a number of other questions, strategic questions around market entry, regulatory filling, market access, etc. One good example here is one of our startup partners developed a new technology to make vaccines more stable. So it's a manufacturing technology for vaccines. And that means that there would be less wastage due to the end of a shelf life. That sounds great, because we know there is a lot of wastage in health system due to, for example, the problem with the cold chain. So that sounds a great proposition. And in the pitch deck, we saw there is as much waste in the healthcare system because of wastage of products that are not stable enough. Great. But then as we went further, we understand that this technology is meant to address a need that actually pharma companies have, because pharma are the ones who develop, who manufacture the vaccines. So eventually pharma are the clients. And this story ended up telling pharma, well, great, because thanks to us, there would be less wastage. And when there is wastage, healthcare systems need to buy more products, right, to make up for the waste. So eventually it means that pharma, if they use the new technology with products that are more stable with less wastage, potentially will sell less volume of the product because it's more stable. Of course, this raises a question, right? They're the ones who would buy. How will we sell to them this proposition? So the market traction is not only about positioning, about market size. It's also, as written on the left, about the messages, who you want to target, what resonates with the end customer, the end payer, And oftentimes we are not clear in our pitch decks. And the last year we'll comment on, I'm aware it's a bit high level, but we are tight with time, is the thinking, which means very much the strategy. So many boxes here to explore together. The business model, will this be a product sold directly to patients? Will they pay themselves or with an insurance, public or private? Will this be sold to physicians who will have the product or the technology in their physician practice, to a hospital, to a clinical commissioning group? Is this the overall NHS system? Is this actually data? Carl will tell you more, that we will make business out. It can be both. Very oftentimes today, products are digital products. So there is a healthcare proposition, but at the same time, data capture that we can monetize. So really explore the various lines of revenues you can make. There is not always only one. And of course, the more you explore, the more you can value, the higher you can value your business. And what type of expenditure this means from the payer perspective. Is this based on a consultation basis, based on consumables, such as strip for a biomarker tester in a device? Is this capital expenditure because it's an imaging equipment? That, even at an early stage, you should have a view of, because this is the way this structures the forecast. And again, investors are, of course, very sensitive to these questions. Now, the price is also a whole story. What is the price? You want to cover costs plus margin, right? But this is not the way the market works. Market won't agree a price that is good for your cause. This is the market price. There is a competition price to be taken account. There is also the payer affordability, either private, individual patient possibly, or healthcare system. And you need to understand how these price points will be regulated or decided. And the link between the value and the achievable price is in many countries, like in the UK, very structured. In the UK, NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, decides that. So again, your startups, it's very early, we know, but the more you can anticipate, explore that, the better prepared you are to answer these questions that may arise from investors, because they have all of that in mind. They see the end. I think I'll stop here. Hopefully we'll have a few questions later.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Laurent. So I think we'd like to get to a point, Carl, where we're going to make a suggestion that if you wish to answer, we have a quick poll, actually. I'd be quite interested. If you have a proposition coming through, we'd be really interested to understand where you think you are in the investment ready process. So Carl, sorry.
Sorry, absolutely. Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you very much, David. On your screens, very shortly, you're going to see a poll based on the discussion that Lawrence just had about the 4 T's of team, traction, technology, and thinking. And we'd like to be able to get your view, an honest view of where you think you are or may not be. So I'm going to share that poll right now. And if we could take a minute or so just to respond to that, and I'll share the results immediately as it's done in real time. So you should get the poll now. Hopefully everyone can see that. If you cannot see it, please speak up. If you can, obviously, please keep silent.
It should be fine, I think. I can see it.
Perfect. I'm going to give it a minute. Okay. I think there's just one person left to answer. I think that's okay. Okay, that's 7 people have answered. So I'm going to end the poll now. As you can see from the results, it's fairly mixed, with people sort of sitting in between at their current state of investment readiness.
I think there's very interesting results there. I mean, clearly the issue is for companies coming through to investors who are seeing such a huge deal flow, unless propositions are at the high end of the readiness scale, they simply pass on. And that might be a reason, if you have experienced it before, why investors are not actually responding, because they just have simply too much choice.
Perfect.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing that now. Excuse me.
And can I ask a very quick question? Sorry, Aline.
Yeah.
Well, for audience or you, from your experience, Oyster Venture Partners, which one of the 40s is usually the one lagging most behind the tech action team thinking, if there is one?
Well, to answer that, I mean, obviously, if one looks at a team, it's a very sort of subjective thing and has a lot to do with the chemistry between the team and the investors. So that's really not that predictable. The technologies are usually highly developed and highly expressed. When it comes down to things like the strategy, there are very often many questions left when one gets into the business model as to how this will go to a particular marketplace. And the other one, clearly from a traction point of view, is what are the adoption drivers, and how well has the market been explored and or particularly engaged with in a way that demonstrates that there's a huge need for the proposition. So I would suggest that the one that is perhaps most important is to make sure that the traction side is highly developed, and that's the one that is usually the least highly developed in all of the propositions that we get. We see KOLs listed or an initiative here or there, but it's relatively weak when it comes to an investor asking the question, why will the market suck in your technology at scale in a very short space of time? And it's very difficult to answer that unless you have significant evidence from a broad spectrum of data points across the market as to why your technology will be adopted.
Yeah, and after I talk about data, we'll talk about some of the tools which can aid in helping you determine exactly where you may sit or where there may be room for review. So if you could, because I know we're all rushed for time, if you could go to the next slide, please, Laurent. So within Oyster, we have what's called data valuation as a service. Now, this concept is relatively new in terms of looking at healthcare and life science companies who have a vast amount of data. And this is before they're even funded or before they've even got a grant, where they've built up data, whether it be from an AI perspective or from a healthcare app or from a biomarker perspective or from a drug development perspective. And what we've found and learned is that data is allowed, based on IFRS 3 accounting rules, to be on your balance sheet under intangible assets. And what's clear from the smallest company to some of the biggest, and I can say the word Medtronic because I've looked at their financial results, their, even for the last 3 years, their apportionment of data to the intangible assets of their balance sheet is 0. Now that's a high, even for a company of that size, that is a huge amount of monetary value that is not attributed to their company. Because obviously our mission here is to ensure that healthcare and life sciences companies are able to get access to funds and have the best value for their company, we have created this service in order to help you identify the actual value of the data you have and get that added to your balance sheet to increase the value of your company. Before I go into any details, in the last 100 days, Oyster Venture Partners has added over $1 billion in unrealized data asset value to the balance sheets of companies. And that's just going through a mathematical process. We have no right to look at your data, nor advise you on the idiosyncrasies around that. But based on a mathematical qualitative model that's in the public domain, we are able to provide a value for that. And the reason for that is, unlike many industries, healthcare and life sciences, you can actually go down to the minute level to get a unit price, a unit cost, an actual data record value for something that you've created, whether that be data, device, drug, and obviously digital health. On the right-hand side of the screen you're looking at, these are actual on-the-record prices for data records for genomics. That's between 2,000 and 4,000 sterling. For oncology records, depending obviously on what particular area of oncology, it can go anywhere from $40 to $5,500 For episodic records, from 30 to 619 and beyond. I've just done a valuation for a health data company who had some episodic records, 11,000 US dollars. Electronic health records, in actual fact, that's a public domain figure of 21 to 192. But just so you know, the unofficial black market value of an electronic healthcare record is £250. So it's interesting that those records are more valuable in the black market. I can go on with population data, drug development, all of which can be varied and different. The key aspect here is that we abide unequivocally with the GDPR procedures and processes, etc. This is all about anonymized data. This is not about an individual's address, name, etc., etc. We're also very aware, based on the Information Commissioner's Office rules around data, that data can be up to 13% traceable back to the patient. We do not in any way, shape or form trace or objectify any of this data back to a particular patient. It is completely anonymous. And this is where the value comes in. Some of you may have read in 2020, a large accounting firm valued the NHS's data at 9 billion sterling. In the same year, which was not in that report, was that the NHS that year alone spent 20.1 billion sterling on drugs. But that data is not shown within the valuation that was performed on the NHS's data for 55 million patients. The reason why I'm highlighting this is, take a medical record as an example. The actual value of that isn't just on the straight medical record as you know it, it's on the medication records, tied to episodic records, tied to treatment records. And this is where big pharma to fragmented data suppliers, to CROs, to even companies such as yourselves, where this data becomes a valuable resource and therefore as an asset is valuable to your company, which is why we perform these valuations to help you. Hopefully that gives you an overview about data valuations as a service. Next slide, please. Very simply, this is the process that we follow. We provide a free tool in step one, which allows you to quickly identify what type of data can be reviewed and potentially valued. We actually go through a planning exercise and then perform data due diligence, which is part of the processes we talked about, GDPR and DPA 1 and 2, in order to ensure that the data from anyone looking at your valuation, that this data, that the actual data is yours. To quickly add to that, we've done valuations on diagnostic diabetes AI companies. So we're actually able to do valuations on AI, which comes into play, particularly around data due diligence, where records are purchased or received from a third party, could be a hospital, but the way that the rules work around AI and the transformation or improvement of data, the actual ownership changes, but these are things we can go on to at a discussion. We then do a data readiness report for you. We then evaluate the collateral, and then we value it based on 18 proprietary models that we currently have to value your data. It doesn't matter whether your data is in a data hub, a data lake, a data repository, a data pathway, it's part of machine learning, it's part of AI. There are methodologies that allow us to do this for you. We then do a signed audit report for you, because we as a third party enable you to be able to add that to your intangible assets to your balance sheet. And once that's done, that has improved the value of your company, which from a data asset value today of 0 to tomorrow greater than 0. Thank you very much. Laurent?
Okay. Super, thank you, Carl and Laurent. So I'm just going to take you very briefly through the way that we evaluate companies and also the SAB process. I'm not going to spend too long on this because I really would like to leave some time open for some questions. But fundamentally, it's very important for us not to take on an uninvestable proposition. And what we do is take it through a process which enables us to report back to the client how it is we would work together if we were to engage, or if we were not to engage, recommendations on what needs to be done in order for it to become an engageable client. And this is very important because otherwise we spend on the basis that we are largely, not entirely, but largely success fee only based. We can't afford to go down a 6 to 8 month investor campaign route that doesn't work. It's very important to us that we win every time with our clients. So we have a 2-stage investment process. Two pieces of this are technology driven. These are effectively investor-ready questionnaires we have that are completed by each of our clients. And the position very simply is that it produces a gap analysis at the end, which enables us, which informs effectively how we would work with you initially to maximize the readiness of your proposition for investment. Part of that process, of course, is that it goes through the strategic advisory board, the relevant team member, whoever that may be, for a report, and the second report is paid for by Oyster independent of everything else, and this is before you engage it, and there's no cost to the prospect. But if we do engage, then of course we're into a different ballgame because we are very much highly informed as to what needs to be done to raise the collateral to a point where investors would actually find it interesting. Next slide, please, Laura. So our SAB looks a bit like that. There's 24 names across the top. Each of them have been mapped onto different domain and subdomain areas with different levels of strength. So depending on the profile and nature of your proposition, of course, we can select from our board. But the key thing is there that we also have this available as a service. So we offer this capability to venture capital companies who don't have the full breadth of skills, perhaps that we do. In our network. So we're also interacting with the venture community itself in providing them with independent advice for deal flow that has not come through Oyster. This is independent of anything that it is that we do. But we go quite deep into the technology, but also into the investability of the proposition and what needs to be strengthened in order to get it over the line. Next slide, please, Laura. And in terms of once we are engaged, then of course we have several processes that we go through. So this really is a sort of an intense 6 weeks working with you to reconstruct the proposition before we approach the markets. And then once we do, we're very, very sort of much on the case together with the whole investment team. So Oyster effectively is like insourcing a specialist investment team to within your business. We work with you effectively as if we were colleagues. So I think that's all I want to say on the investment on the Oyster process, but clearly we'd be very happy to discuss with you individually your particular situation, your particular case, where you think you are in the cycle, how you feel you may need to be helped, and what it is that we could do in order to get you to the point where you can maximize the chances of landing investment for your company. Thank you, Laurent. So I think we've come to a point actually where I just wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end. We've got 10 minutes. And we'd be really interested to understand any questions that you may have, and really sort of break this out into a sort of an open discussion, because the issues that face everyone, regardless of the technology or science, are pretty much all the same. But the acquisition of investment consumes a significant proportion of any CEO's time, together with their CFO and anybody else that's involved in the process. So if anyone has any questions, we'd be delighted to field them at this point.
Thanks, David. Maybe waiting for audience to warm up. I have a quick one because, well, thanks for showing the whole process of how you work with companies and what's important to fit in their value proposition. I wondered on the finding investor perspective. So from an organization, it's also to be able to, well, scout for investors, find the ones that are right to them, and that also take a lot of time and energy. So is that something you can help with, or have recommendations on this element of doing due diligence for the investor you want to bring on board?
I'm very sorry, Elaine. Elaine, actually, your sound is not great. Just wondering, could you finish the end of your question again?
Sorry. So that was about doing due diligence on your investors as a life science organization?
Yeah. Okay, well, this is a really interesting point. I mean, the fundamental issue with investors, take a classic venture capital provider, for example, is every time they would make an investment in any company, they're hardly going to invest in a second company of a closely related science or technology. So by definition, once an investment is made, the sweet spot, the next investment that they would like to make clearly moves to somewhere else within the remit of their particular fund. So the technology that we use effectively helps us to track that at scale. And therefore, part of the process, of course, of getting to understand the profile so closely, so deeply with each of our clients is that we understand the nature and the profile of the investor that ought to be approached, the one that is most likely to invest in that particular technology at that particular time. We have systems and processes that get us into the investor base all over the globe, but predominantly in the UK, in Europe, and of course in the US as well. So it's quite easy for us to identify a list of investors to approach, which we then, of course, then qualify by direct contact and shorten it down to a list of engageable investors. Carl.
Yeah. Helena had a question, which I believe Laurent has just answered to her, but it might be worth highlighting. It's actually a very good question. The number of slide decks that we get through where more scientific based than what in particular investors are looking for. As investors, be it VCs, PEs, or high net worth individuals, they're looking for a story. They're looking for you to walk through what your technology is, how your team has come together, what you're doing, how you intend to get traction on that, and what the thinking was behind that. As we mentioned, the 4 T's. In case anyone can't see it, Laurent has graciously come back to Helena, and 15 to 20 slides. No more than that is generally the practice, because it's the first few pages that an investor is going to attract and make almost their entire decision on. It's the rest of the information that allows them to stay the distance. Laurent, any views on that, or David?
So we are speaking here the very final product, and the more thorough as I wrote, we can go in preparing this, the better also we are, not only in writing these few slides, but also in the pitch, the discussion, and overall the very point of this entire exercise, including the deck, but not also, is to raise credibility.
I mean, there's one further point I'd add to that, which was that about 3 weeks before Christmas, I was doing a seminar on behalf of UK DIT to the embassies across the Nordics, and there were 7 pitches that were being made to. It was a little bit like an X Factor panel, and we were asked to judge the propositions that came through. It was quite interesting that of the 7 propositions, 5 of the propositions were all about the technology, all about the features of the proposition, what it might be able to do here, what it could possibly do there. But very few of the pitches were positioned based on the problem. And to have the maximum impact, it is really important that pitches. I mean, the point that Helena has made and the one that Laurent has answered about 15, 20 maximum number of slides that ought to be punchy. The key thing is to define the problem, to understand what is happening within the market and what changes would occur if the solution was brought in, and then to also add third-party validators, key opinion leaders, any industrial partners who are interested in co-developing another generation of this technology. These are all factors that are important. The key thing is to love the problem as much as you love your own solution. And if you start from loving the problem, you will come across to investors when you engage with them as really understanding your target market. And it just happens that your solution, of course, is the perfect fit. So our recommendation would be to see your problem not in terms of a series of fantastic features that you've been developing for many years, but as a series of benefits for the target space within the healthcare sector that you want to access. Anybody else have any questions? We're very happy to answer them now, or indeed, if not, then very happy to engage with you on a one-to-one discussion. We'd be delighted to review what it is that you have and go through your case individually. But I think we have time for perhaps one more question if there's one. Okay, I think that's where we are, Aileen. So I hope that was helpful to everyone. And as I said, we'd be delighted if anybody wants to contact us. Just simply look up oysterventurepartners.com. There's a contact page. Come straight through to me. We'll be very happy to get back to you individually and set up a meeting where we can review your individual case.
Yes, thank you, David. And I'll keep it short because I'm conscious of my horrible background noise. I apologize again for that. I thought it was very insightful, really good comment. And thank you for joining us today. I will circulate the recording and the slides if you're happy with that, and obviously making connections so you can discuss directly with Laurent, Carl, and David direct if you have any question. They are trustful nucleus partners, part of the Virtual Innovation Center, so they're happy to have this initial discussion with you and take it forward if you think that's useful. But thanks a lot, everyone, and I'll mute now, shut down, and I hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.